Greetings in the name of the Most High Yahuwah and His Son Yahusha, to the 12 tribes that are scattered abroad. I am Brother Hiram, and I am bringing to you in this video part 2 of a series which I have entitled Matthew 19:9 Exposed. What did Yahusha really say? And in this video, we're going to ask a question, and that question is the Matthew 19:9 textual variant intentionally being covered up? So why am I asking this question? The modern Bible versions make sure to bring out textual variants in their footnotes. There are certain textual variants that are universally noted in the modern versions. Now, if you don't know what a textual variant is, then go back over part 1 of this series and I break it down in detail and I give examples of what textual variants are. Because of this, most believers who read the modern versions are aware of the most well-known variants, such as Mark chapter 16, verses 9 through 20. So we'll be going through this later on in this video, where Mark 16:9 through 20, that it is actually excluded in the textual variant. Many, and I would venture to say most believers today who are aware of textual variants are not aware of the Matthew 19:9 variant. Because the divorce remarriage epidemic today reaches to the highest places in Christian leadership, scholarship, etc., the idea of a bias against this variant is not out of the question. While we want to avoid the extreme of looking for a conspiracy under every rock, we also want to avoid the opposite extreme of ignoring red flags when they do appear. We are going to examine the footnotes of 3 out of the 4 of the world's best-selling Bible versions. The English Standard Version, or ESV, the New Living Translation, or NLT, and the New International Version, or NIV. The fourth would be the King James when it comes to the 4 best-selling Bibles, and this is information I got from a couple of years ago, and so I don't know if it matches exactly 2024, but I would venture to say it hasn't changed much. But they actually did a tally of what are the best-selling Bibles in the world, and it's these 3 plus the King James. Now, the King James doesn't have any footnotes, whereas these newer versions were brought out after thousands more manuscripts, thousands of additional manuscripts were discovered outside of what the King James was translated by back when it was eventually put together. And so for that reason, these modern versions will have footnotes and they will show you where the variants occur. We are going to examine the footnotes according to the following criteria: what they say about the commonly known textual variants, what they say about the Matthew 19:9 variant, how thorough is their dealing with the Matthew 19:9 variant. And so what I mean by that is the primary issue that we have is what we've covered so far, and that is the current versus the variant Matthew 19:9a, the first part of it. So whether it's supposed to say, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, or saving for the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery. That's the primary issue when dealing with the Matthew 19:9 variant. The secondary issue is that the Codex Sinaiticus excluded Matthew 19:9b. That's the latter part of it, where it says, and whosoever shall marry her who is put away from her husband commits adultery. So that's the secondary issue, is that some Bibles, they don't include that because of the Codex Sinaiticus not including it. So we're going to start with Mark 16 verses 9 through 20. It's actually an exclusion variant. Now, what I mean by that is that the textual variant, the one that's different from the majority of the manuscripts, it actually excludes Mark 16:9 through 20. And so it doesn't have it in there. And you see the note, this is from the ESV now, and you see the note at the bottom of the example that I give here. It says some of the earliest manuscripts do not include Mark 16 verses 9 through 20. So they're not included in some of the earliest manuscripts. Now, when we look at verses 9 through 20 here in Mark 16, and then we look at the footnotes at the bottom, it says Mark 16 verse 9, some manuscripts in the book with 16:8. Others include verses 9 through 20 immediately after verse 8. At least one manuscript inserts additional material after verse 14. And some manuscripts include after verse 8 the following, and then it just puts a statement there. You can read the rest on your own time. But anyway, they go into great detail in letting you know about the textual variant when it comes to Mark 16 here. That was the ESV. Now we're going to look at the NLT, New Living Translation. Now we see verses 1 through 8, which is in all of them. There's no dispute with that. But at the bottom, look at the note here for the NLT. It says, most ancient manuscripts of Mark conclude with verse 16:8. Later manuscripts add one or both of the following endings. And so here we have a shorter ending, and here we have the longer ending, which is verses 9 through 20. And so if we look at the footnote, at footnote C at the very bottom, it says the most reliable early manuscripts of the Gospel of Mark end at verse 8. Other manuscripts include various endings to the Gospel, and then it goes into the shorter ending and the longer ending. And so we'll move on. Now the NIV. Here we have verses 1 through 8, and then there's a break in it, and it tells us in the brackets, the earliest manuscripts and some other ancient witnesses do not have verses 9 through 20. And then it proceeds to show us what 9 through 20 says in the NIV. And so we look at the footnote here, and it says some manuscripts have the following ending between verses 8 and 9, and one manuscript has it after verse 8, omitting verses 9 through 20. And so it shows an alternative ending here. And so the point I'm making here is look at how meticulous they are in bringing out the textual variant. Just look at the language that they're using. I mean, they're very much on top of this. So we're going to look at another variant, which is actually an exclusion variant, meaning that the variant, the one that's different from the majority, actually doesn't have the passage here, and that is John 7:53 through John 8:11, which contains the account of the woman caught in adultery. That I call it an exclusion variant because the variant excludes this passage. Here, it doesn't have it in it. And so the ESV, if we look at verse 52, they replied, "Are you from Galilee too? Search and see that no prophet arises from Galilee." And then in the brackets, the earliest manuscripts do not include 7:53 through 8:11. And then it goes on to verse 53 and talks about the account of the woman caught in adultery. Now let's look at the NLT, New Living Translation. We have verse 52, and then right afterwards it has in brackets, the most ancient Greek manuscripts do not include John 7:53 through 8:11. Now let's look at the NIV. We got verse 52, and right afterwards it says, in the brackets, the earliest manuscripts and many other ancient witnesses do not have John 7:53 through 8:11. A few manuscripts include these verses wholly or in part after John 7:36, 21:25, Luke 21:38, or Luke 24:53. And so I'm showing you this because I want you to see how well detailed and how descriptive these newer versions are in bringing out these textual variants, and even see the language that they use to make sure that you know that it's the earliest manuscripts, it's ancient witnesses that exclude these passages. Now we're going to look at Matthew 19:9. We're going to look at the Matthew 19:9 variant, and we're going to look at how these new versions that are the best-selling in the world. So this is the most widely circulated Bibles in Christianity now. All right, we're going to look and see how they handle the Matthew 19:9 variant. So ESV. Now, Matthew 19:9, and I say unto you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. And it's got a little A by it for a footnote. Let's jump down and see what it says at footnote A. It says, Matthew 19:9, some manuscripts add, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. And so you see that they didn't put the second part of what's normally in Matthew 19:9 here, but it does tell you some manuscripts add that. Now it says other manuscripts, except for sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. And so that here is the primary variant that we're dealing with in Matthew 19:9. And I am glad to see that at least the ESV, that they put this in here. All right, they actually put this in here that, now it says other manuscripts. I'll deal with the language a little later. But they actually put in here what I've been showing you all along in this series, that the Matthew 19:9 out of the Codex Vaticanus, and how it reads like our Matthew 5:32, except for sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So they brought it out. I do give them that much. Now we're going to look at the NLT, how they handle the Matthew 19:9 variant. So let's look at verse 9 here. It says, and I tell you, whoever divorces his wife and marries someone else commits adultery, unless his wife has been unfaithful. And so we see that that doesn't have the second part that we're used to seeing, and whosoever shall marry her who's put away commits adultery. So we have footnote D. Let's look at footnote D here. D, 19:9, some manuscripts add, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. And then it says compare Matthew 5:32. Now it says compare Matthew 5:32 because at the end of Matthew 5:32 it has the same ending. It says, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. But here it says some manuscripts, and it only makes reference to the secondary issue of the Matthew 19:9 variant, and that is excluding the part that says anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. But they don't even deal with the primary one, the most important one that we've been dealing with all along. And that is, does it read like the Codex Vaticanus, that saving for the cause of fornication causes her to commit adultery? Or does it read like it reads in most of our Bibles, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another? So the NLT doesn't even deal with that part. Now we're going to look at the NIV. Now the NIV is the best selling. It's number one. And from my understanding, it's been number one for decades. Best selling Bible in the world, meaning that it would be the most widely circulated Bible in the world. Let's see how they handle the Matthew 19:9 variant. So here we go. Matthew 19:9 says, and I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. And so we see that they're missing the last part, which says, and whosoever marries her who's put away from her husband, or marries her who is divorced, commits adultery. We see they're missing that part. But if you look real close, do you see a footnote in here? See, I don't see one either. So let's go down to the footnotes. Perhaps they didn't put the footnote, but perhaps they're going to deal with it in the footnotes. So let's see. In the footnotes, all right, A, we have a footnote for 1904. B, we have a footnote for 1905. C and D, we have a footnote for 1919. And E, we have a footnote for 1929. No footnote for Matthew 19:9. So you know what that means, brothers and sisters? The NIV, New International Version, did not deal with the textual variant of Matthew 19:9 at all. Best-selling Bible in the world now, didn't deal with it at all. So let's do a summary of what we just went through now. The ESV, let's see how they did. Now, the Mark 16:9 through 20, the variant that excludes that, they did bring that out, and they used the terminology of earliest manuscripts. John 7:53 through 8:11, the variant that excludes that they brought that out, and they used the term earliest manuscripts. Now, Matthew 19:9, they bring it out now, and they bring out both places where there is a variant. Okay, they noted it for 19:9a, but it uses the term other manuscripts. And then 19:9b, where it has the ending of it, whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery, they use the term some manuscripts. So, let's go on. NLT, Mark 16:9 through 20. Now, they did bring it out, and look at the language they use. Most ancient manuscripts, most reliable early manuscripts. So look at the authoritative language that they use to make sure that you know about this variant of Mark 16. Okay, the John 7:53 through 8:11, it says most ancient Greek manuscripts. So they bring that out. Very authoritative language. Now, Matthew 19:9, they didn't bring out the first part, which is the most important part. All right, but the second part, the ending of it, they did bring that out, and they used the terminology some manuscripts. Now, the NIV, best-selling Bible for decades, the #1 selling Bible in the world, most widely circulated. What do they have to say? Mark 16:9 through 20, they brought it out, and they used the terminology earliest manuscripts, ancient witnesses. John 7:53 through 8:11, they brought that out, and they used the terminology earliest manuscripts and ancient witnesses. Matthew 19:9, they didn't bring out anything at all in the way of variants. They didn't bring out the first part, which is the most important, which the ESV did. I commend them for that at least. They didn't bring out the second part, which the ESV and the NLT did. They brought out nothing at all in the way of variants for Matthew 19:9. Best-selling Bible for decades. Brought out nothing at all. Challenge questions. Have you heard about the textual variant of Matthew 19:9 up until now? Now, I ask this question because I've been in this game for about 30 years myself, and I didn't hear about the textual variant of Matthew 19:9 until a few months ago. This is after 30 years now. So have you heard about the textual variant of Matthew 19:9 up until now? Did you notice how that none of the modern versions accredited the Matthew 19:9 variant as being from the earliest manuscripts or ancient witnesses? They didn't use authoritative language for Matthew 19:9 like they did with Mark 16 or John 7. And keep in mind that the Matthew 19:9 variant appears in the Codex Vaticanus, the earliest known Bible, Greek Bible, that we have in our possession, certainly worthy of being called early or ancient witness, early manuscript, but they didn't accredit it as such. So they used terminology like some manuscripts, other manuscripts, rather than these authoritative terms that they use for Mark 16 and John 7. Did you notice that? If you never knew about Mark 16, 9 through 20, could that affect your salvation? If you're not sure about it, go back and read it. Read those verses and ask yourself, could that affect your salvation if you never knew? If you never knew about the woman caught in adultery, John 8, 1 through 11, could that affect your salvation? In other words, when I ask these questions, I am saying that if you never knew that that was probably added, or that Mark 16, 9 through 20 was probably added, if you never knew about this, all right, could that affect your salvation? You believe that? You believe it could affect your salvation if you never knew that the earliest manuscripts exclude these passages in the Bible? Do you believe that that could affect your salvation if you didn't have that knowledge? If you are divorced and remarried and never knew about the Matthew 19:9 variant, could that affect your salvation? Now, this is the most important question in here, all right? And the reason why I say this is because millions of people are hanging their hat on what they think Matthew 19:9 says in order to justify either themselves or others in divorce and remarriage. And so, knowing that, I'm going to ask it one more time. If you are divorced and remarried and never knew about the Matthew 19:9 variant, could that affect your salvation? And lastly, seeing that divorce and remarriage is so widely accepted in Christianity today, from the highest places of leadership on down, could that possibly be a reason for the deafening silence on this variant? Now, when I say deafening silence, now, a lot of people in leadership and the scholars, they know about this, but I'm talking about the deafening silence when it comes to the common people. When it comes to people like myself that didn't even know about this for 30 years of walking with Yah and his son, Yahusha. Like a lot of you that are looking at this video, you never knew about this until you saw my videos. That's what I mean by the deafening silence. I'm talking about the regular people that are not a part of the scholarship and the leadership and seminaries and people like that. So they know about it, but some way, somehow, that knowledge just doesn't seem to make it to the regular people. Could there be a reason for that? Seeing that divorce and remarriage is so widely accepted in Christianity today, from the highest places of leadership on down, could that possibly be a reason for the deafening silence on this variant? So in closing, I will say in answer to the original question, is the Matthew 19:9 variant intentionally being covered up? In my personal opinion, it sure looks like it to me. But if you, the viewer, are not comfortable with going that far with it, then can you at least agree that in this video, I have brought out some pretty serious red flags?